Can you tell us a little bit about just general, big picture maybe, Reach, Teach, Send? I know you have a book with that title, but that's actually the name of your ministry, you and Janet, and your work. And then we'll talk about maybe your newest book and some of the lessons that you've been sharing with people lately through that. But tell us about Reach, Teach, Send.
Sure, happy to. Reach, Teach, Send, as you said, the book is the same title. And really the book birthed the ministry. In writing the book, it gave me a vision for being able to step into multiple roles and using different giftings or even skills that I'd acquired on the mission field over the previous 10, 12 years. And so it's an umbrella that gives me opportunity to do evangelism training, mobilization training, including taking some short-term teams just in that country. But after working in Asia and the Middle East, I kind of picked up a global opportunity. So Reach, Teach, Send allows me to do those things globally, as well as pastoral care, and started a ministry network. So it's kind of an umbrella for several different things that, again, allows me to use some of the giftings and skills picked up along the journey.
That's wonderful. So I've been privileged to get a first-hand, maybe front row view of God using you in your giftings, whether it's mobilization or disciple making and training people in disciple making and evangelism. And then now, I guess more recently, with your writing and releasing some books, being blessed to read those, but also your pastoral care. We could spend the whole program just talking about your background in any of those areas, but can you tell us a little bit, just our listening audience, maybe what is mobilization? What does pastoral care for missionaries look like? What does it look like to train maybe on a global scale?
Yeah, great questions. I'll start with mobilization. In a lot of ways, it depends on where the person, the organization, or church is at. So it can be very entry level, as far as just raising awareness of what it means to be on mission and how a church can participate in global missions and try and get their perspective broadened to where they're thinking globally. Or if somebody's already feeling mobilized, like they want to participate in missions, they're doing some things, you can then step in and give them a better strategy or a strategy that fits the DNA of their church or their organization to help them be even more strategic in their mission effort as a church or an individual. And of course, it also could include working with an individual one-on-one where you're doing some cross-cultural training kind of thing as far as mobilization. Pastoral care was something we stepped into as our Lord asked us to step up into that role after being in Mexico for 7 years. And pastoral care, from our perspective, is very relational in trying to build a relationship with missionaries on the field and then helping them walk through any of the challenges that they might be going through, whether it's financial issues, raising support, that kind of thing, or loneliness, or missing their church back home, or even problems on the field where there's a lack of success in the ministry they planned on launching into. And I think the two greatest gifts that we brought into that was the ability to be relational, and then having been on the field and walked through almost all those things. If you're on the field any length of time, you're going to encounter most of those challenges. There's some that were above our pay grade, and you hand those off sometimes to a counselor as needed. But pastoral care is absolutely loving, building a relationship of trust so that when there are challenges, they will reach out to you. Because sometimes on the field, they're living in between two worlds. Their world at home and the world that they're serving in, the country they're serving in. And relationships aren't like we typically have where we're living the place we grew up, where we work, and where we know everybody. And then I guess lastly, evangelism and disciple making. It's material I put together that, just like the book says, Reach, Teach, Send, a practical approach to evangelism, disciple making, and mobilization. But in terms of evangelism and disciple making, the practical approach is giving practical tools. Oftentimes we get a lot of head knowledge in some of the things we read from books or acquire along the way. But we don't always have the practical tools for how to start a conversation or how to share your testimony or how to lead a small group, how to model Christ one-on-one in a mentoring situation. So those are the things that we would teach And I'm blessed now to do those globally. So recently I've been into Cuba and Mexico, and I think God is opening some doors other places. Typically it's been all in Mexico and the States, but I've got a global perspective with Reach, Teach, Send to be able, as the Lord provides, to go wherever He leads.
Awesome. So there's a couple of places where you and I really overlap in some of our thought, our heart, and our giftings possibly. And one is, you mentioned the practical nature of disciple making and evangelism and the how-tos. We know it's important, but how do we actually flesh that out in day-to-day life? And we both have a burden to make that as plain and simple as possible for people to actually just get in the game and get involved with what God's doing in a practical way. And then also the relational part. I will admit that I'm not good at relationships. I struggle, but that's kind of where you start. You start with your struggle and you get to know people, and God uses those relationships to strengthen those areas. But the relational nature of disciple making and the relational nature even of training and mobilizing and definitely pastoral care, God doesn't do much of anything. I'm not saying He can't, because He's God. He can do whatever. But God always uses relationships in His work. And so whether we're good at relationships, whether we're struggle with them, we are to relate to people and to love people and to know people in a deep way as best as He gives us that chance. Well, let me take a little bit of a turn in the sense of, you mentioned your time in Mexico, and before that
Can I just jump on one thing on that?
Absolutely.
I launched a ministry just in the past couple of months, one-on-one mentorship training. When I was in Mexico in the evangelism discipleship training, our main go-to for making disciples was small group ministry. And it's just been 6 months ago that I felt it's missing that one-on-one component. So back in January, I put myself under a mentor for one-on-one. I knew this guy was a one-on-one guy. And I knew I had to change my perspective from just small group training. And it's been phenomenal. I currently have a small handful of guys that I'm doing one-on-one with, and you're absolutely right. The relationship takes a whole different level.
That's awesome to hear that in any kind of, what you would call those, concentric circles, where you have the one-on-one, you might have the small group of 2 or 3, and it might go out from there in larger groups. But at every level, the core comes down to that relationship and focused on Jesus and what He's doing in our lives. It's important to never get away from that relational focus. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that in you from the start, of never getting away from that and never seeking a huge platform. Yeah, you want to be used globally, you want to be used wherever God sends you, but you never get away from that, the importance of that one. There's a focus in some circles about, asking the question, who is your one? Who's that one that God is sending you to reach? Who's that one that God is sending you to mentor, to disciple, to encourage? Who is your one that maybe God is sending you to support them as they go, as they are sent out? So that's a good question for all of us to reckon with. So Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your newest book? I think it's called A 10-Year Journey. So did it take you 10 years to write your book, A 10-Year Journey? How did that come about?
It actually did. Most of it came from articles and some blog posts that I had written over that 10-year period. And I felt like it came to summation at the end of last year that it had to go out as one piece of literature. And because in looking back on those articles and thinking about, is there a book here? What occurred to me was this spiritual growth spurt, I call it, that happened during that 10-year period. And I thought that was worth putting it out there. I think that's on the preface of the book. It says, spiritual growth spurt that I found myself in looking back over that 10-year period. And then I began to assemble the book to share some of those things that I learned in kind of a storytelling way. So it's called A 10-Year Journey, 1 week at a time, because it turned out to be 52 stories. And so I just said, all right, 52 weeks, 1 week at a time. I had to have a catchy title, I guess. But and then different stories will be some a little more reflective on my own personal life, on what God was doing in my own life, in some things that were on the mission field, some things that weren't related to the mission field. And then some of them were cultural observations, but all of them really kind of dialed in on having an application for the reader. Very, very short articles or stories, but at the end, it was always pushing people to be a learner or to step into the harvest in some way, or join on mission, or find, keep going in their own journey to discover what God wants them to learn on that journey.
So let me back up a little bit to just a basic fundamental question that some of our listeners might have in their minds. So you're telling me you learned all these things, or a lot of these things, while on the mission field. So I thought missionaries had it all together to begin with. So you're telling me as a missionary you're learning and growing in the Lord as you are on the field?
I got to be honest, man. When I went on the mission field, I felt totally unprepared, because a lot of guys that go in the mission field are young. They're in their 30s. I went on the mission field in my 50s. A lot of guys have a lot more letters behind their name, a lot more education, so I was a little intimidated by that as well. But I had a heart to serve. I knew I had a calling on my life to go serve in cross-cultural ministry, as we all have a calling on our lives, in whatever that is. And I had heart knowledge. We learned a little bit about some of that in the training we went through, the head knowledge versus heart knowledge, which really changes your actions when it moves into your heart. It becomes part of who you are and how you spend your time, your money, your talents, your resources. And so I went with that heart knowledge, but man, God used my time on the field to grow me up. I was not as mature maybe as any of us really think we should be. We think that there's this level of spiritual maturity that we're going to get to someday, and we can kick back on the recliner then. But the truth is, I think even when you step up and into your calling, that's when the real growth. I mean, God kicks his level of wanting to grow us up a notch, and so I encourage everyone to step into their calling, because he will begin to pour into you the things you need to do what he's called you to do.
That's awesome. Before we go any further, Kevin, can you tell our listeners the best way to connect with you or with Reach, Teach, Send? Where can they find information about the books, about the ministry, maybe just connect with you?
Absolutely, yeah. It's pretty simple. ReachTeachSend.net. That's our website, ReachTeachSend.net. And there's information about a link to the books, which all my books are available on Amazon. I've written 6 books. This is number 6. The last 2 were very ministry focused. I started writing curriculum and blogs early on, and then my first book was a book about a dog in Mexico, because I had a dog in Mexico.
Everybody loves a dog
God
story.
Wanted to use me as a writer, and that's built a platform to be able to lead people into the harvest and teach and those kind of things. So ReachTeachSend.net will connect you with me if you're looking for some of that evangelism, disciple-making training globally, or the one-on-one mentorship, or even mobilization, pastoral care, that kind of thing.
Awesome. So we're talking today with Kevin Smith with Reach, Teach, Send, and you want to definitely check that out at reachteachsend.net. Kevin, the book, The 10-Year Journey, or A 10-Year Journey, it was basically your 10-year journey, but the book is inviting readers into their own journey, however long it might be, to follow the Lord, learning what he has for them, the next step, and being faithful in that as you discover that. You've kind of touched on some biblical truths in the book, maybe some cultural observations, maybe even your own personal reflections. Can you share a few of those things in the book with us?
Yeah, some of the truths for me, kind of obvious for a missionary, is perseverance, I think, and there were various opportunities for perseverance and learning what it means to walk by faith versus fear. I remember when COVID came out and we were in Mexico, and fear came over the whole world during COVID.
Yeah.
And our ministry got shut down because we were what they call a parachurch ministry that would go into churches and teach the evangelism training, discipleship training. And so for a while, we were just like, okay, God, should we go back to the States? And after a couple of weeks of praying, God revealed that we were walking in the spirit of fear. And not that we shouldn't be cautious in the time of COVID, but we could see how fear was gripping our ability to walk by faith and altering our plans. So what we did, we ended up shifting ministry and staying in Mexico until we eventually did step into the ministry in Asia and the Middle East. But yeah, that's one instance where we were hunkered down and living in fear like the rest of the country, and God gave us that boldness to walk by faith. He was teaching us things along the way. I learned more about listening to God in my prayer time rather than going into Him with that list of things we're interceding for. Learned a lot about spiritual darkness in our last few years as we were serving in Asia and the Middle East. I found myself in Cairo, walking the back streets of Cairo, and it was just a dark place. And God would just have me praying as I'm walking through this dusty streets. They're selling sheep right next to where the bakery is, and selling bread and a high identity Muslim culture. Same thing in India. We were in Varanasi, where we were right on the Ganges River on a boat, where you were seeing people cremated because that's what their religion, the Hindu religion, has them do, and sending off their dead ancestors into the spiritual world as far as they would think. And it really made you reliant on prayer and listening to God and how to respond to those things as we step into some of these dark places, not just overseas. They exist right here. They're just a little sneakier here.
Right.
Things like materialism and busyness here in the States that we don't equate and give the same value to as tools the enemy is using to distract us from God, the real God.
We like that shock factor about our own culture and what we consider normal in our own lives, but God has a different perspective about a lot of those things. We have just as many idols here in America as they do in India. We just have different names for them, but we keep them in our homes and we keep them in our hearts. That brokenness, as you write about, that brokenness is universal, and it's even, it runs through our own lives. So speaking of your own life and learning to listen to the Lord, what are some of maybe the highs or the lows that you guys went through in your work on the mission field and through pastoral care around the world, even maybe recent? What are some of those things that God taught you personally that you can share with us?
Yeah, that's a great question. By the way, I like that phrase you use, that shock factor that we're missing, that you do get when you step into another culture. We don't get it in our own culture. That's a great phrase, the shock factor. I'm gonna steal it.
Go for it.
A lot of things. But yeah, for me, when I do accountability checkups, sometimes we use some different tools in the small group, and we'll say, what's your high this week? What's your low for the week? And I've discovered over the years that the highs and the lows are very often the same thing, aren't they? It's like, I had a struggle at work, a fight with my boss, but then I prayed about it and God showed up and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he changed my heart about how I see this person or whatever it is. So those highs and lows often are the same thing. I hear it over and over again in small group accountability stuff. So the highs, some of the highs were the relationships we built along the way with people, beautiful people in other cultures. Some of them are for longer seasons, some of them shorter. But then also in leaving, when you go to the next place in ministry, and we ministered in 3 different cities in Mexico. So that's kind of a low when you have to say goodbye to those folks. So it's both a high and a low.
Yeah, the goodbyes, Kevin, sorry to interrupt, but that's a huge barrier, I think, in a lot of people's hearts, whether to join God in His call in their life on the mission field. They don't want to say goodbye to the people close to them, around them, maybe parents, grandparents, maybe grandchildren, maybe children, whatever the case. Or like you're saying, if you're a successful missionary, if you're fruitful, you're not going to stay as long, and you're going to move on. Imagine all the goodbyes the Apostle Paul had in his life. He had a lot of goodbyes that he had to say. Can you tell us a little bit, just for a minute or so, What is that like for people to have to say goodbye, and why is that such a barrier in saying yes to Jesus?
Yeah, and even, Nathan, in terms of the highs and lows, that was something I would say is a low on your mission field, is there is loneliness. You have left family and friends behind. But the high on that is you put a greater dependency on your relationship with God. Even in my marital relationship, there was a greater connectivity in my marriage. So there's some loneliness whenever we move to a new culture or a new city even. But if you're not intentional to make relationships, it's still going to be a challenge. But on the mission field, yeah, you're definitely sacrificing the folks back home, sometimes family, deep friend connections. But the plus is, the high is, I grew in my relationship with God, especially when there's that language barrier.
Yeah.
Because, man, when you're trying to speak and you're worn out by 4 or 5 hours of using another language, but we talk to God in English, so that's pretty cool.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Awesome. So we're talking with Kevin Smith. His recent book is called A 10-Year Journey, 1 week at a time. It's 52 chapters, or lessons, if you will, on his own personal growth and observation and learning from the Lord and Scripture on the mission field. But it's also an encouragement for each of us as we read to experience our own journey and our own growth that God has for each of us. Kevin, if there's someone listening and they're wanting to connect, what are some of the things that you can help people with? I know you're a very helpful person. You've challenged me and encouraged me and helped me in my life. But whether it's mentoring or training, what are some of the things that you guys offer with Reach, Teach, Send that you can help with a church, help with a small group, help with an individual?
Yeah, and they can find that information on the website, the variety of evangelism training. I'm really jazzed about the one-on-one mentorship training, although I've only set aside so much time to do that. It's 90 minutes once a week. It's one-on-one. It goes pretty deep. I think what I'd love to share, I think it came out in this book a little bit in giving application or action steps after each chapter kind of thing, is whatever your gift is, whatever your talent is, whatever you're doing now for the Lord, because this is a program called Exploring Missions, and try and find a way to use it globally. And that's what Reach, Teach, Send has allowed me to do. I went down as a missionary to Mexico and did evangelism, disciple-making training after being a learner and discovering what they needed down there. But in launching Reach, Teach, Send and being based out of Texas now, but available globally, I begin to think all the time about what skills do I have, what giftings has God given me that I can use globally, because I know the end of the story, where every tongue and tribe and nation is in front of the throne of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I as times draw closer from some of the things I see, I think we need to be on mission more now than ever. And so try and think about the things we do all the time, whether you're a prayer warrior or you're a giver or you're an encourager, or you like to travel, or maybe it's a short-term trip, or maybe you're going long-term. Think about how God can use your giftings in the context of a global perspective. Because with a little imagination, you'd be amazed at how you can participate.
Absolutely. Those connections are closer than what we think. Maybe in 30 seconds, Kevin, how can our listeners maybe pray for you or join in what you have going on, what you're working on? Is there a specific way we can pray with you?
Yeah, it is a new ministry, a 1 year, we're almost 1 year launch now. And whenever you step into a new ministry, there's that transition period where you're kind of holding your breath and saying, I think we made the right step, God. So you can pray that we continue to have assurance. And God gives me that all the time. I just had another guy yesterday sign up for one-on-one mentorship. And that encourages me so much. But pray that we stay encouraged and pray that, we're in our 60s and travel's a little more challenging, but pray that God would keep our physical health strong in order to continue to serve as long as we can.
Definitely. Well, brother, I will continue praying for you guys, and I know our listeners will as well. Thank you for listening today to Exploring Missions. We've been talking with Kevin Smith with reachteachsend.net. Please check that out, connect with what God has for you on your next step of the journey.
We live in a day when America's families families are under attack like never before. Buddy Smith, Senior Vice President of the American Family Association. The war against biblical principles rages on numerous fronts. The internet, Hollywood, Washington, D.C., America's corporate boardrooms, and the list goes on. At American Family Association, we're committed to standing against the enemies of God, the enemies of your family. And we recognize it's an impossible task without God's favor and your partnership. Thank you for being faithful to pray for this ministry, to give financially, and to respond to our calls for activism. What you do on the home front is crucial to what we do on the battlefront. We praise God for your faithfulness, and may He give us many victories in the battles ahead as we work together to restore our nation's biblical foundations.
90.5 KTXG Greenville, Dallas.
State employee, you have the opportunity to support the American Family Association through the combined federal campaign by designating a monthly payroll deduction using 12037. You help AFA continue to fight for your family. So when you complete your CFC form, remember, AFA's number is 12037. And thank you for your help.
This is the Middle East Report, your connection to truthful reporting on Israel and the Middle East. I'm John Riley. On April 13, 2024, Iran attacked Israel directly for the first time using 320 cruise and ballistic missiles, along with drones, in an effort to wipe out Israel. Israel successfully defended itself in what many are saying was a miracle from God. I spoke to Barry Stagner of Calvary Central OC in California about that day. He's also the author of 6 books, including The Time of the Signs, a chronology of Earth's final events.
We often hear about the Iron Dome and the aero defense system and all that. I think we need to remember the iron hand of God. You know, He who watches over Israel neither sleeps nor slumbers. And now, you know, here we've got these clearly supernatural events. Supernatural doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, there can be God slapping missiles out of the sky, but also, you know, giving discernment and words of knowledge and these other supernatural manifestations where the Lord tells, you know, those who are in control and in power, you know, hey, something's coming, be ready, be alert. Watching all of these things happen, it's a twofold thing that we can look at there. And one would be the fact that, you know, God did watch over them, God did protect them. But also, I think we need to recognize that the efforts on the part of the Iranians were basically for the Ayatollah to save face. I mean, he had to do something. He couldn't sit on his hands. You know, all of this bloviating and the other things we've seen, you know, regarding this attack that killed 5 Iranian Republican Guard generals or high-ranking officials, and they had to do something. They threatened and threatened and threatened. Actually, I was speaking at a prophecy conference when they launched the missiles, and they launched the missiles about 20 minutes before I spoke, which made for a rather interesting audience response. You know, they were very attentive when I got up there, you know, considering the fact that there was a 1,000-kilometer flight, drones that fly, you know, not much over 100 miles an hour. The missiles are a bit of a different story, but, you know, basically there was a response in order for the Ayatollah to say, see, we made threats and we responded. But, you know, drones flying with the defense system that Israel has, the assistance that they received from France, the United States, and Jordan even, which was very unusual. You know, it's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. So, but it allowed the Ayatollah Khamenei to say, you know, we responded. And now even we're hearing responses from, you know, what Israel has done now in a very similar fashion. Rather than blowing up the nuclear facilities, they just let them know we can get in. And so now you've heard language from the Ayatollah and others, you know, well, we're satisfied. We're not going to go to war over this and all that stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of beyond saber rattling that's happening now. It's turned into aggressive action. But even within that, it's a game. Games have errors, and errors lead to greater issues. And I think that's very possibly what could launch things into the full-scale Ezekiel war. I personally believe that it's most likely that the destruction of Damascus is going to be the catalyst for the Ezekiel war scenario. that, something's going to happen. Iran maybe tries to ship a dirty bomb or a nuclear warhead into Israel, because Israel has just shown, you launch something from your territory, we're going to take it out. If they get something into the Golan or into the city of Damascus, 40 miles from the northern border of Israel, it's a little bit easier shot into Israel from there. And if Israel, attacks, blows up a nuclear warhead in the city of Damascus, Damascus becomes a ruinous heap. Turkey, Russia, Iran, Sudan, and Libya are going to potentially say, all right, that's it, we're going in. And we do know that God is going to respond and wipe out those armies and leave them dead on the mountains of Israel, taking 7 months to bury the dead. So this is a dangerous game that's being played, but there's a certain amount of cat and mouse that's being played that often leads to catastrophic results.
That's the Middle East Report. Thanks for listening. Get a podcast of the show when you visit afr.net.
Remember, our phone number is... Oh, wait. This is a air, so we won't be taking phone calls. Although you might hear calls that sound live, and they were when they were taken. But, well, you get the picture. The following is an encore presentation on American Family Radio. We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Walker Wildman, Rick Green, we're your hosts each week on the program. It's good to be with you today on this edition of The Core. Walker Wildman here with you in the studio. And once again, we're glad to be broadcasting into your vehicle, on your smartphone, on your browser, however you're listening. Glad to be with you today. The show is made available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check out At the Core wherever you listen to podcasts and listen to Rick and I each week here on American Family Radio. We live stream the video over on Facebook, At the Core on Facebook, and on our stream platform, AFA Stream. The URL for that is simply stream.afa.net, stream.afa.net. You do need an account to watch. You can create a free account at stream.afa.net, watch this program, and much more. And if you want to become a monthly partner and donate monthly to American Family Radio, you'll have a litany of benefits with that. You have unlimited access to all the content. You can stream on up to 5 devices simultaneously. That's a lot of smartphones and a lot of TVs. And we have the iOS and Android app for AFA Stream as well. So a lot of opportunities for you to keep up with the program. Psalm 116 is where we are this week. The writer here says in the first few verses, I love the Lord because he hears my voice and my supplications. Because he has inclined his ear to me, therefore I shall call upon him as long as I live. The cords of death encompassed me, and the terrors of Sheol came upon me. Another word for hell there. I found distress and sorrow. Then I called upon the name of the Lord. O Lord, I beseech you, save my life. And you see here, that's just verses 1 through 4 in Psalm 116. But the Lord, the writer here first displays the affection for the Lord, saying, I love the Lord because he hears. But also, the writer makes it clear that he shall call upon the Lord as long as he lives. The writer says, therefore I shall call upon him as long as I live. So, 2 things here. We should have affection as believers, as Christians. We should have affection towards the Lord. That's what the writer here displays. And we should have constant supplication before the Lord. That's what the writer here says. As long as I shall live, he says, therefore I shall call upon the Lord. That's Psalm 116, verses 1 through 4. A few events that I want to remind you of, I've mentioned these in passing, but a few events I want to remind you of. Our team is going to be at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum in the Cincinnati area on October 31 through November 2. October 31st through November 2nd, they're going to be in the Cincinnati, Ohio area at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. We're going to have a venue there at the hotel for our own events. It's going to be called AFA at the Ark. That's late October, early November of this year. If you want to join us, go to afa.net/events, afa.net/events. A few other things. Just a reminder, episode 5 of AFA at Home, we released it just about a week and a half ago, and it's available at our AFA Stream website, stream.afa.net. You can watch episode 5. We discussed the LGBTQ issue from a biblical perspective. And then lastly, we're going to be, my dad and my brother and I, we're going to be leading a tour, as we do each year, to our nation's capital, also Mount Vernon, the estate of George Washington. And before that, in the days prior, we're going to be in Williamsburg, visiting Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown. So we do this trip twice a year. We're going to be there in September. If you want more information about that tour specifically, you can simply go to spiritualheritagetours.com, spiritualheritagetours.com, or if you go to your search engine, you can simply type in Washington, D.C. tours, Tim Wildman, or Tim Wildman tours, anything like that. Any of those keywords will get you to the right place. Jumping into our content for today, before we go into our second and third segment, of which we have guests, I want to play a clip here. This is CNN, and they are panicking. CNN and the Democrats are panicking about Biden's failing poll numbers amongst black voters and President Trump's really rising poll numbers amongst black voters. And these numbers are quite shocking. I knew President Trump made significant headway in both 2016 and 2020 elections when it comes to black voters, but I did not know it was this significant. And what we're talking about now is even better or more significant than previous election cycles. So this is about a 2-minute clip, but listen to this CNN freakout. Clip 2.
Over the weekend, a direct push from Donald Trump to pick up support among black voters in historically Democratic voting bloc. CNN senior data reporter Harry Etten is with us. So where does the race stand among African-American voters right now?
Yeah, I keep looking for this to change, to go back to a historical norm, and it simply put has not yet. So this is the margin, or Biden and Trump among black voters, compare where we were at this point in 2020, compare where we are now. You know, at this point, look at this. In 2020, Joe Biden was getting 86% of the African-American vote. Look at where it is now. It's 70%. That's a 16-point drop, John. And more than that, it's not just that Joe Biden is losing ground, it's that Donald Trump is gaining ground. You go from 7%, single digits at this point in 2020, to now 21%. And again, John, I keep looking for signs that this is going to go back to normal, and I don't see it yet in the polling. If anything, right now we're careening towards a historic performance for a Republican presidential candidate, the likes of which we have not seen in 6 decades.
And when you dig into this number here, what is the makeup of that number?
This is where we get very interesting. So I decided to dive deeper into the crosstabs, figure out where is it that Joe Biden is truly struggling among black voters. All right, so this is black voters, Biden versus Trump margin. Look at black voters age 50 and older, and you'll see, look, Joe Biden was leading amongst this group at this point by 83 points back in 2020. Now it's 74 points. So yeah, a slight decline in that margin, but nothing out of this world. Look at black voters under the age of 50. Holy cow, folks. Holy cow. Look at this. Joe Biden was up by 80 points among this group back at this point in 2020. Look at where that margin has careened down towards. It's now just, get this, 37 points. That lead has dropped by more than half, Mr. Berman. I just never seen anything like this. I'm like speechless, because you always look at history and you go, okay, this is a historic moment. If this polling is anywhere near correct, we are looking at a historic moment right now where black voters under the age of 50, which have historically been such a big part of the Democratic coalition, are leaving it in droves.
So this might explain why President Trump is having town hall meetings in Detroit, Michigan. Long time Democrat stronghold. If this report is true, this is shocking. This is shocking stuff. If this report is true, then my previous critiques of what I viewed as a Trump campaign failure might be wrong. Maybe Trump doesn't need to be reaching out to the traditional conservative voting base. Maybe Fulton County, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, Minneapolis, maybe these are the places where the Trump campaign sees the most opportunity to not gain, to not solidify an existing voting base, but to actually pick up new voters. Because that's the problem here, is that there's a hard set percentage of voters that they're going to vote Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter who's on the ballot. They are going to vote either Democrat or Republican every day of the week. Now, what that breakdown is, I don't know. I would say it's at least 70 to 80% of the voting bloc. I mean, how many people do you talk to that go, yeah, I don't know who I'm going to vote for in November. I might vote for Biden or I might vote for Trump. I don't know. We'll just have to see. No, people know. People have their opinions formed. These are not new commodities here. I mean, Biden's been around since a long time. I mean, I think he ran for some kind of local thing in like Delaware in the 60s. So, and Trump, who doesn't know Donald Trump? So the fact that there are even voters that are up for being swayed, to me, is quite astonishing. But maybe our populace isn't as, maybe there's not as many ideologues as I thought there was. I mean, maybe people just don't care, like floating their vote back and forth between the two parties. To me, the two parties are so drastic. I just don't see how people can go back and forth between the two parties. Now, between candidates within the parties, I get, like the primaries, I get that. That changes, that fluctuates. But to see voters shift from Democrat to Republican and back and forth, that's just quite astonishing to me. But maybe some of these voters just don't have a set value system, don't have a set ideology, and they're just going for whatever floats their boat, to use the old saying. So President Trump has picked up significant ground in the black community. Significant ground. This should make the Democrats be very concerned. Because the black community has been one of the most loyal voting blocs, just like evangelicals. The equivalent is just like evangelicals have been to Republicans. The black community has been just hardcore. We're voting Democrat, it doesn't matter. And you heard Biden's response when he was being interviewed during the 2020 cycle. I mean, when he was questioned about, hey, you know, why should black voters vote for you, Joe Biden? And Joe Biden said the notoriously really racist and demeaning statement when he said, you know, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, is what he said. That's his quote, not mine. Which, How insulting. Like, is that not, that should be disqualifying immediately. To disrespect, undermine, and humiliate a voting bloc to that degree. But he did. And the reason President Biden, now President, then candidate Biden, responded that way is because that's how much the Democrats have been able to count on that voting bloc. I mean, it's not even up for debate how this voting bloc is going to vote. And he just couldn't dare that the question was even being asked. Like, why am I having to campaign to the black community? You guys already vote for me. Quite astonishing. But once again, if this report is true, and we'll find out in November, it could prove doom for Biden. I mean, that's it. If Biden loses double digits in the black community, he's done for. His candidacy's over. You can't win and give up that much of a critical voting bloc that has been historically hardcore Democrat.
He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. When my wife and I first started having children, we discouraged our family members from speaking to them in baby talk. You know, the gaga goo goo stuff. The reason was simple. We wanted our children to speak English well. Baby talk would hinder that development. The same principle applies to spiritual development. If we want our children to be wise disciples of our Lord, we should ask ourselves how much of their time is spent investing in spiritual maturity. Protracted time in the company of spiritual baby talkers will inevitably cause harm.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Hannah Fletcher, your Communications Director. Every year, we are thrilled to see where God moves us as we love and serve those in need across the country, sometimes on a moment's notice. It can be hard to keep up when our Rapid Response Ministry is serving hurricane victims in one state, while our Safe House Ministry is building a facility of refuge in another. Today, I am excited to share with you about how you can stay up to date on all the ministry is doing through text. That's right, texting. Right now, you can text the word HOPE to 86373 to join our text alerts. You'll be notified anytime God calls us to love and serve the brokenhearted through rebuilding, rapid response, mass feeding, or safe house construction. It's that simple. Text HOPE. That's HOPE to 86373. We can't wait to share updates with you soon.
If you're 65 or older, you know this. Seeing your healthcare costs go up and up is frustrating. And maybe you were just notified that your Medicare costs are increasing again, or you're just tired of the massive deductibles. Well, here's some good news. There's a program that can really help with this. It's MediShare 65 Plus. It's an affordable, reliable alternative. You can choose any Medicare provider. You get telehealth access anytime you need it. And MediShare 65 Plus is a low-cost option for those with Medicare Parts A and B, and it fills in the gaps where Medicare stops. MediShare is a Christian healthcare community that aligns with your faith. People actually pray for you, they encourage you, and it's proven, too. It's been going strong for over 30 years now. So call now. You can get one low monthly price for up to 10 years. You're not stuck with increasing costs. You can do something about this today. Call MediShare 65 Plus. Find out how much you can save. Call 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the second segment of The Core. Walker Wildman here with you on today's program. Glad to have you with us in the studio live on American Family Radio. Don't forget to download the AFR app or simply visit afr.net. Either of those places you can check out the podcast, listen live, and much, much more. Jumping into our guest, we have on with us Oklahoma State Representative Clay Stairs. He's with us now. He represents District 66 in the state of Oklahoma and has been working in the legislature this cycle on various items. Representative Clay Stairs, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm happy to be